when we started to adopt some new development practices, one of the things that I was very keen on was having a framework and a structured, I'm going to go ahead and say policy, although it's not enforced in a policy, but guidelines for how we do AI-driven development. And the core principle of all of this is it is your code. You own it all the way through. In the same way that I'm not going to ask you what kind of switches are in your keyboard. Apparently, I have an obsession with keyboards today. But in the same way that I don't care what keyboard you use to write your code, I don't necessarily care what tool you use. I care about the outcome. I care about what you produce, and I care about ownership and understanding. If you write the code and you understand it and it's excellent, that's fine. If you have gotten assistance with that code through an agent, as long as you can be accountable for the code and understand it, that's fine too. For me, it's all about the outcome and the ownership in the process.
Welcome to the Information Week Podcast. I'm your host, Senior Editor Jean-Pierre Roux. Today's episode, we are talking about AI and team balance. What are the core principles that drive your human to AI team dynamics? It is not a secret that many organizations face the call to adopt AI-powered efficiency, while team members might be wondering what that means for their future. And there might not be easy answers to that, so let's have a discussion. Today, I am joined by Saurabh Gupta, CTO for GreyOrange. Saurabh, thank you so much for being here.
JP, great to be here. Looking forward to this.
And we are also joined by Winston Astrachan, CTO for Phobio. Winston, thank you so much for being here as well.
Thank you. It's a pleasure.
Gotcha. Great. Actually, we probably could subtitle this episode "Three Guys in Blue Shirts" for this particular episode. Okay.
It's hard to pronounce names. We should add that.
All right. Let's take it from the top of a core question in this space. For both of you, is AI a means to eliminate certain roles in your organization, or is it a way to increase productivity with the existing teams that you have, or is there some kind of middle ground or a combination? Either of you, please, offer your thoughts on that.
Yeah, I can kick this off. I'm an AI optimist, and I do feel, in general, I feel AI is gonna do good for the world, and that includes jobs, that includes productivity. To answer your question, the way I think of that is there's definitely a middle ground here. AI, for the most part today, is focused on increasing productivity. I have personally not seen instances in my company or across the companies that I'm aware of where it has led to any significant job loss. People are still trying to figure out what's the right way to increase productivity. I do strongly feel that increased productivity will lead to increased gains for the economy. We will have people who are going to be 50%, 100%, 200% more effective, but it's not a fixed sum pie. Like that will lead to more work for all of us.
Yeah, I agree with all of your points, Saurabh. I consider myself maybe more of an AI realist than optimist. I will, be happy to admit for this conversation, I'm more cautious in a lot of my approaches than other CTOs in our space. But my belief and what I've seen is that it probably is going to land somewhere in the middle. We haven't cut a bunch of roles and don't necessarily plan to do so. A lot of my peers haven't been going through massive cuts either, but we have seen an evolution. What we look for in the spectrum, how many senior engineers, how many junior engineers, that's going to shift. We may find ourselves with a much greater need and new types of QA roles that didn't exist before as code is developed in new ways. So I think that what I'm seeing is a change in what we need, but not necessarily big cuts. I think a lot about heavy industrialization and when factories first began to realize electricity, and then later when they began to realize robotics, all the headlines said 40% of the world will be out of a job next month as robotics, automation takes over factories. Didn't happen. We just saw a shift. The specialties and the skills needed changed, and I think we're seeing a lot of the same right now.
You brought up headlines. When you see some of this, as a follow-up with that, you see some of the headlines that are out there with some of the larger organizations that are saying we are specifically making cuts based on AI. Are you feeling any kind of pressure or thought okay, because they're doing that, we have to at least consider that? Or is it, okay, that's what they're doing, but that's not our house?
That's, I think, what you just said, JP, probably is the most relevant. When I see a lot of the headlines about major corporations making cuts, they are all corporations that can afford to do so and be wrong. I certainly won't speak to anyone else's market position, but certainly from my standpoint and at Phobio, that's not a gamble that we could afford to be wrong with. And a lot of the company, you have the Metas of the world saying, 20% of our workforce is gone. Guess what? They're still a highly desirable employer. If they decide in 9 months it wasn't the right route, they will quietly replace all of those roles that were cut without any loss. So I think I don't feel the pressure because that's not my environment. I work with what I have and the realistic layout of my landscape. And for me, I don't feel the pressure to make cuts because I'm not the same kind of organization.
Well said, Winston, and I agree with that. I want to say there are at least a couple of factors outside of AI productivity which is driving these job cuts. If you look at organizations like Meta and Google, they were very bloated to start with. And I do feel a lot of what is happening is the bloat is going away with the excuse of AI, not necessarily because of AI. And secondly, there's also a bit of anticipation of what the future holds. So there is an anticipation, like typically the way these organizations work is they would tend to overhire in anticipation that, hey, we're going to be 20, 30% more work year over year. And now people are pausing and saying, wait, does that really need to happen? Wouldn't that 20, 30% extra work come from AI? So a lot of that it really is because of that. To your point around pressure, there is some. I think it's hard to completely get away from that. And maybe, Vincent, I'm sure you're even seeing at least some bit of that. Like I have conversations with my CFO every day on this, which is we're still very actively hiring across the board, across every single discipline. And he comes to me and says, hey, Saurabh, I'm hearing all of this about Meta laying off 50% of the people and whatnot. And like, when will you do the same thing? And it's like, no, it's not happening. Our goal is we're going to, as an organization, we're going to keep improving. We're going to keep getting more and more productive. Maybe there's a time that will come where the breakdown of roles will change. Vincent, to your point, right? That yes, the composition, the number of people in different roles will change. There is now less room for people who have to do routine, menial, repetitive tasks. That should be done by AI. But on the whole, I don't really see significant job cuts for us in the future.
Leading off from that, actually, that hiring aspect of things, both of you, when you're potentially looking at new hires, will the idea of AI proficiency, be a requirement over other types of skill sets now? Is that the kind of, the choice skill sets that people are, that you're looking for, or is there kind of a balance that you're looking for?
Yeah. So this might be the first one where I think, possibly I have a slightly different mindset, but maybe not. It's what's so fun about these conversations. For me, it's more about the mentality and attitude. I think very quickly we're going to see a interview conversation about AI proficiency that's kind of equivalent to asking an engineer if they're proficient with using a keyboard. It's almost going to be understood and expected that they have some degree of understanding. And what that means for me is I'm going to become more interested in the knowledge gaps that could form because of that proficiency. If we have, and we see it every week, if your model of choice has an outage, if your provider isn't working, what can you still offer me? When we're at 3 a.m. and there's a fire and you are just not able to supply the appropriate context to your agent to help fix it, are you still going to have something to offer me? So in many ways, for me, I'm actually, I almost assume they're going to have some degree of proficiency, just like I know they're going to be able to type letters on their keyboard. For me, it makes the gap of what they know on the hard skills on the technical side more important as I look at candidates for the future.
Yeah, actually, I feel something similar. So AI literacy is important. I think there's no doubts about that. I don't think it supersedes the rest of the skills. I mean, the base is really your skill set, right? Are you a good engineer? Are you a good product designer? Are you a good developer? That doesn't go away. But one thing I do ask every single person I interview is, how has your daily workflow changed because of AI in the last 2 years? And if someone tells me it hasn't changed, it's a big red flag for me. Right? Like I just can't imagine that today in this world, you're doing exactly the same things you were doing 3 years ago with no changes and you're living under a rock. For me, it's important to notice what is that improvement. And that improvement could be, yeah, I use Claude for designs, or hey, I go in and do my market research much more effectively than what I was doing earlier. Some things should have changed because of AI.
I think that's a really practical approach because, even before the advent of LLMs as we understand them and agentic development, I think that would have been a great question and a great red flag even before. If you said, I'm blind to the advent of an object-oriented language that doesn't change my workflow at all, or, I think it's always relevant. It's critical for any good engineer to be constantly up, constantly looking forward, constantly aware of what's going on, even if you don't answer that question, at least from my perspective, by saying, oh, haven't written a line of code in 18 months, I just prompt all day. I think total relevance to the solicitation of how has it changed, and has it changed, because the answer should always be yes.
Yeah, Vincent, I like your analogy, right? You're saying really more and more, right? Like AI is a tool, and that's how we should think of it, right? And in the past, that tool could have been an object-oriented programming language. That tool could have been a great compiler. So it's important that people know how to leverage that tool. But at the end of the day, it's a tool. It's not replacing you. It's not replacing your core skill set.
Yeah, we have when we started to adopt some new development practices, one of the things that I was very keen on was having a framework and a structured, I'm going to go ahead and say policy, although it's not enforced in a policy, but guidelines for how we do AI-driven development. And the core principle of all of this is it is your code. You own it all the way through. In the same way that I'm not going to ask you what kind of switches are in your keyboard. Apparently, I have an obsession with keyboards today. But in the same way that I don't care what keyboard you use to write your code, I don't necessarily care what tool you use. I care about the outcome. I care about what you produce, and I care about ownership and understanding. If you write the code and you understand it and it's excellent, that's fine. If you have gotten assistance with that code through an agent, as long as you can be accountable for the code and understand it, that's fine too. For me, it's all about the outcome and the ownership in the process.
Well, speaking of ownership of the process, thank you both for your insights on those questions. And now it's time for questionable ideas, our tabletop exercise where our panelists will serve as interim executives at the fictional company known as Questionable Ideas. My guests have not seen these scenarios in advance. They will be intentionally over the top in certain places. My guests are not responsible for the presence of goblins, kobolds, or gremlins in these scenarios. That is entirely my fault. For reference, for folks who are catching this show for the first time, the kobolds represent more of the kind of like traditional stoic old school thinking that you might see amongst IT teams. Goblins represent the more fast moving, not necessarily fast thinking, fast moving ideas, catching on, latching on to the shiniest technology that might be out there. And the gremlins, they prefer chaos, and they will do things because there's a big red button. And you know what? Let's just push that thing and see what happens, for the greater good or amusement on their part. Okay, so again, since you're both CTOs, you'll be co-interim CTOs for Questionable Ideas. Remember, you have the same kind of rights, privileges, and powers that you would expect to have in your current roles. And if you need to call in additional resources, be it the legal team, HR, the National Guard, to deal with the things that you are being presented with, please feel free. Again, it's a fictional company. Wacky things might happen. Do what you need to do. Okay. All right. Winston, Saurabh, are you ready?
I am. This sounds like fun.
I hope so.
Okay. All right. First scenario. The CFO of Questionable Ideas went missing a couple of episodes ago. So now the company is trying to automate as much as possible for financial efficiency. The Gremlins introduced the Taskmaster AI model that not only automated certain functions and roles, it took it upon itself to have the initiative to identify divisions and departments it decided were redundant or operate at a loss. Taskmaster's math has not been reviewed because there is no CFO right now. but termination emails were already been sent out by Taskmaster. Will you let Taskmaster continue its rampage?
Absolutely not.
No.
I think that's an easy one.
Yeah. I was expecting some tough scenarios here, but no, that would be a total dereliction of duty. I mean, at the end of the day, we have a responsibility to this interesting organization, and it can't continue that rampage. Certainly not.
Winston, one policy we've had, and we might have had the same, is we can use whatever as much AI we want anywhere, but at the end of the day, there needs to be human accountability. And that is something that's true for every process, whether it's finance, whether it's engineering, whether it's development. Eventually, the accountability has to be human and not AI. And to me, this would be a complete, will go completely against that philosophy.
Yep, you're a man after my own heart, Saurabh. That's at the core of it all. There's a very famous, often misquoted line about, at the end of the day, a computer can't be in management because it can't be held accountable. And while the origins of that have been twisted and the actual words have been twisted, I think the principle is very true. I can't hold this model accountable. I can hold the finance team accountable, or the developers accountable, or whoever I need to make sure that we rectify the situation. So yes, agreed. And I think that would apply here at Questionable Ideas.
Gotcha. So we take Taskmaster offline completely, or maybe try to cage it up and try to see if you can rework it.
I'll probably go the rework route. Like I like that idea of having AI tools be available as a starting point for things. What I would do is first, let's find that CFO, figure out what is happening, why is he out for 2 days, get him back, make sure that he or his team is using that tool. And likely what will happen is 70% of what that tool is saying may be right, maybe wrong, but they will have to do those decisions, and they will have to rectify and put in the right policies.
Yep. Agreed again. I think probably not, throw it in the shredder, but certainly I'd probably figuratively air gap it. I'd like to see what it's making, but I'd like to have people justifying any actions on behalf of it. If it leads you to a conclusion, if Taskmaster says, the strange ideas department is not contributing to the bottom line, they're a cost sink, the whole department has to go, I don't think it would make sense to ignore that, but I would want then humans to justify an action taken on behalf of that input. Just like, if I read something in a management textbook, I shouldn't let that management textbook guide my decisions as an executive. I should justify them within my environment, but it doesn't mean the information itself is irrelevant.
Well, that's good thoughts and good points from both of you on that. And in terms of reference, the CFO went missing a couple of episodes ago because the goblins allegedly did something to cover their tracks, and the panelists that I had on that episode did not take action to send out search and rescue to find the CFO. So the CFO is still missing for Questionable Ideas because the goblins got up to too much mischief. Okay. Speaking of goblins, we're on to the second scenario. Now that you've got Taskmaster under control, that happened, but not without some staffers parting ways with the company. The goblins, back again, are rallying remaining teams to use AI tools heavily to work leaner and faster, though they are not minding the rising costs from the pace of token spend along with escalating price, which is why the CFO went missing. At this rate, it could soon cost more to maintain the AI than the people that it is replacing. Meanwhile, there's rumors that some of the former staffers are coming up with a plan to form a rival service that taps into their skills at a lower cost without the escalating price of AI. How would you handle this internal and potential external issues?
I'll tell you, JP, I'd probably be taking a little bit of maybe a different approach. I'd be having some good conversations with my HR team and probably my middle management team, because regardless of the role of AI in this, we have some people problems. Maybe people's not sensitive toward goblin kind, but we certainly have some goblin resources problems that we need to work out here.
Yeah, I think there's at least a couple of key things there. One is there's definitely an internal PR problem that will need to be addressed. I think in this day and age, it's really important for everyone, right? And Winston, you and me and CTOs to really play a proactive role in talking to people about AI and to address the concerns that they have. It's real, right? I mean, all of us should be worried for good or bad reasons. So there is definitely this internal communication that needs to go above and beyond, and that's something as interim CTOs will focus on. On the second piece that you mentioned, the like people creating a rival organization, that is something also we would need to worry about. I would have confidence that our organization, the way we are doing this, strange ideas aside, we should be able to leverage AI in the right way and not make ourselves susceptible to disruption from someone who's not doing it. But I wouldn't discount it. I think it will be a good thing for us to analyze and see, right? Is AI actually giving us those positive results?
Yeah. I'll toss two more things into this process. Probably the legal team needs a bit of a discussion, depending on the level of these employees that are fracturing into a splinter organization. We might have some recourse to consider. But finally, I think regarding the cost control element, I maybe to a fault. I like a good policy and I like a good framework and a good structure. It comes from a lot of my background. So to me, cost control would indicate we need to review what we have in place to prevent that. If everybody has a corporate credit card and they can run up as many tokens as they want, it's hard for me to place all of the blame on the consumer of those tokens. We haven't given them a structure in which they can operate. So we probably need to have a little chat internally as co-CTOs and then talk to our finance team about what's appropriate and how we want to control this versus its benefit to the organization.
I appreciate your thoughts on that. Definitely have seen some certain headlines where at least some groups allegedly are kind of, flaunting the fact that they are spending more on AI versus than the people that they hired. And I'm like, how does that math work? Did the CFO go missing?
I have an interesting two anecdotes on that. One, I have heard of scenarios in which companies are beginning to measure performance based on token use strictly. I'm staunchly opposed to that. I really believe it should be outcome. Your performance is based on what you produce, when you produce it, and how accurate it is to what the need was. I have been clued into certain scenarios in which token use driven performance is being thwarted by people just having AIs making noise and talking between agents and getting no real work done so that you can exhibit wonderful token spend. And I think that's wholly expected given how you gamify these behaviors. And then on the specific point of spending more tokens than a salary, most of the people who I have seen saying that should be an admirable goal are people who stand great personal benefit if you do. So I always think when I'm being sold an idea, more than a product, but an idea, who stands to benefit if I buy that?
Yeah. It's a really good point. But this is a hard problem, and it's a problem I have been struggling with, Vincent, too. How do we modulate the amount of AI tokens, and how do we show uh, the value that they are generating? So I can say in our company today, no one is really spending more on tokens than their salaries, but there are people who are coming in the ballpark, at least in the same order of magnitude. And there are people who are not spending any tokens. And my philosophy of this has been everyone should be spending at least some tokens, right? Like that. It's not a strict measure of performance, but if someone is spending zero tokens, I feel something is wrong. Beyond a certain level, it is actually very hard to measure. Like, what is the impact? Like you said it correctly, right? It's not about token use, it's about impact. But the way the tokens are being used is very hard to correlate that, right? Like, can we measure I mean, none of these are good metrics. Can we measure number of lines of code? Can we measure number of bugs fixed? Can we measure number of designs created? And I've also seen instances where AI is almost self-serving and trying to come up with thousands of lines of code for something that should take 100 lines of code, or coming up with hundreds of designs, but they're like, kind of all bad. So it is a struggle. Like, I don't know the answer, but all of us will be spending a lot of time trying to figure out how to measure these outcomes.
Yep, I agree. It is absolutely a challenge. I think you've kind of hit on all of my feelings on the matter. Anytime you try to set a strict metric, people will find a way, not even necessarily maliciously, but to meet that metric. Lines of code was a great example. That was hugely popular in the, 2010s, 2012 kind of era. Everybody was, my team is shipping this many lines of code. This is like telling a grade schooler that their essay has to be 7,000 words long. Guess what? It's going to be the same content. There's just going to be 6,400 likes, ums, and ands in there to pad it out. So it is a perennial challenge, regardless of AI. How do you measure performance? And again, in my organization, I focus very much on the outcome. Now, AI may play into that. If I have an engineer that spends 0 tokens, and an engineer that spends half their salary, but somehow the engineer spending 0 tokens has twice the output, I'm not going to penalize that performer. I may be asking questions about the efficacy of the engineer that's spending tokens, but for me, it's about the output, and that's features, that's quality, and that's timeline. Those are the big things that I care about. Is it foolproof? Absolutely not. I may be measuring the wrong things, and we're all learning and evolving all the time. But as soon as you start picking into one little element, token spend, lines of code, somebody's going to game that.
All right. Speaking of gaming things, on to the last scenario. All right. So it seems you have your teams and AI under control. No one is going rogue, at least for now. But the dynamics have changed. Some senior engineers say that code from the junior engineers, supported by AI agents, is becoming indecipherable to them. But it works. At least the AI-powered test suites say so. So the CEO decides it's time to reduce the number of senior engineers. While that's happening, a series of outages soon knock out some of your resources. There are 503 errors, servers being restarted. First, it is sporadic and brief. Then the issues span hours. Eventually, it is discovered that there were background cron jobs running that were not documented and gumming things up. The kobolds emerge from their data dungeon and say that you have not found all the scheduled tasks in the system. They call it a learning lesson as they sip their tea and decidedly not help. Where do you look to resolve this issue? With institutional knowledge, revamping the AI, where do you start?
I probably start with the board of directors, to be totally honest, because the thing that precipitated this was a CEO stepping out of their purview. And I know that's a dangerous thing to say, but everybody has a role and a specialty for a reason. I probably start with a good conversation with the board of directors. From there, though, that gets challenging because we already have a lot of damage that's done. I don't know that we can just get rid of all the kobolds. I don't know. JP, what do you think for the more minutia of cleanup of this?
Yeah, but it's an interesting thought, and yeah, there's definitely this notion of why did this happen in the first place. And JP, I don't know what your goblins are up to here, but they're definitely creating some trouble. We need to get to the source. I would want to challenge this notion of why we don't need senior engineers anymore. Right? Where did that come from? And I have two conflicting thoughts on that. One is I do think today with AI, senior engineers have the potential to be the 10x, 50x more valuable people, much more so than what they were 5 years ago. So whoever is the CEO that made this call, I would definitely go and question them. But then the second slightly contradicting point of view I'll also have on that is the AI has leveled the playing field a bit. And there were notion of someone being senior earlier because they worked at a place for 20 years and accumulated knowledge. And now there are junior people who are coming in who have access to that same knowledge in much, much lesser time. So while I still think senior engineers is going to be a very important commodity, that definition might be changing of who that person is.
I think there are certainly elements of truth to that. I would ask, do you feel like access to the knowledge and grasp of the knowledge are the same? I've certainly had people who come in and are well prepared to talk about topics that they don't really internalize and understand. But with that said, for a capable engineer, certainly the timeline to internalize that knowledge has accelerated. So I think any measure of a senior engineer by seniority, by number of years in the field, that absolutely compresses. I think, for me, it definitely becomes as much about the knowledge you actually internalize and can make decisions on, as opposed to just the number of years you've been sitting at a desk.
Yeah, it's a very good point. And that distinction you call out, Winston, is really, really important, right? It's the distinction between knowing something and the grasp of something. And my point was more around, I think a lot of people were getting away just from the fact that they used to know things, right? Like you could have people, I don't know, average, mediocre people spending 15 years in an organization, accumulating this knowledge, right? And justifying their role based on the knowledge that they have. And this is one place where AI has already disrupted things, will probably disrupt it a bit more, that there is less room for people like that. Now with all your MCP servers and everything, right? All that information is available to a new person. It's really your ability to grasp and act on that information, which will end up being the differentiator.
Yep. You as a human have to have more to offer. And I believe that by and large humans do. But you have to have more to offer than a model. And that for me is important, especially when we talk seniority.
Maybe that would be a perfect ending to this episode. As a human, you need to offer more than a model.
Okay. Well, the Cobalts definitely concur, and they appreciate your thoughts on senior engineers, offering more than a model. They also applaud that they want the intervention of this rogue CEO deciding to just kind of dismiss folks out of hand because of the presumed efficiencies. Okay, awesome. Right. Well, Winston, Saurabh, you've been fantastic. I appreciate you coming on the show today, dealing with the kobolds, gremlins, and goblins in these scenarios for questionable ideas. Thank you so much for being part of it today.
Thank you for having us.
Absolutely. Great to be here.